I hate to break up a good lunch conversation, but this is a Swiss-related event, so we need to stay on time here. So for those of you I haven't met, I'm John Tuttle. I'm vice chairman of the New York Stock Exchange, but I think much more importantly, I'm an American Swiss Foundation Young Leader, class of 2011. There we go. And on behalf of our entire team, a very warm welcome to 11 Wall Street. It is a privilege to host His Excellency Jacques Pitteloud, the Swiss ambassador to the United States. It's a pleasure to have the Honorable Ed McMullen, who recently stepped down from admirably serving us in Switzerland and is an all-around great American and great guy. So wonderful to have him here today. And we're thrilled to have today's program here. I mean, it's great to have Bob Giuffra, the chairman of the American Swiss Foundation, here. I saw a number of members of the board, including my longtime friend Kim Reed, is here. Patricia and her entire team as well, and of course the Young Leader alumni and friends of the American Swiss Foundation that are with us today. As I mentioned, we're excited to host this here. And I can't think of a better place because we're very much aligned with the goals of the American Swiss Foundation, and that's to work to further strengthen the relationship between our businesses, our markets, our people, which will ultimately further strengthen the relationship between our countries as well. We're particularly proud of the longstanding relationship between the New York Stock Exchange and Switzerland. We're home to north of a dozen companies from Switzerland that in aggregate have a market value of well over $500 billion. They employ well over 500,000 people directly and probably multiples more indirectly. And importantly, this is a place where they can come to access capital that they can use to grow and expand their businesses, launch new products, tap into new geographies, and along the way, improve quality of life in this country, in Switzerland, and around the world. And importantly, it's also a primary avenue for investors, large institutional investors, but also individuals. It gives them that avenue or that pathway to invest in Switzerland. So we're thrilled to have you here today. Looking forward to the dialogue. Hopefully you all get a chance to exchange views, build relationships, and ultimately drive impact and move forward together. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to the chairman of the American Swiss Foundation and a great friend, Bob Giuffra.
John, I really want to thank you for sponsoring this fabulous event. Can we come back next Friday? But we really appreciate it. And I have as a special token of our appreciation here is the American Swiss Foundation cufflinks I want to give to you. They're really cool with the flags on them, and that'll be great. And I also want to thank Joe Semsar. Where are you, Joe? Come on up, Joe. Joe is a young leader, class of 2022, and he ran a great tour this morning, so thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And I'd like to thank the ASF team of Vanessa Berry, Rachel Reardon, and Bella Way for getting everything done today. We really appreciate it. What I thought I would do for just a second is introduce everyone to the mission of the American Swiss Foundation. The American Swiss Foundation was literally founded 500 feet from where we are standing at 44 Wall Street, literally within days of VE Day in 1945. And for nearly 80 years, the foundation has cultivated the historic friendship between the United States and Switzerland. And this historic friendship reaches back literally to the founding of both the United States anyway, and goes back to, we got the idea in the United States of having states and federalism from the Swiss canton system, and then the Swiss got the idea of their constitution from people like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton. And we really have always been called the sister republics, and that's because we share those democratic values that are so important of liberty, the rule of law, and free enterprise. So our mission is to connect Swiss and American young leaders through our programs and bringing them all together. And, with war in the Ukraine, our mission is more important than ever. And I also believe on the American side, we can learn so much from our Swiss friends. With less than 10 million people, the exact number this morning I looked was 8.7 million people. Switzerland is one of the most innovative and economically strong countries in the world, and we can learn so much. Now, there's a document here on your table. There's a QR code. I'm not that technologically sophisticated, but if you want to learn about the organization, we urge you to do so. Our flagship program is our Young Leaders Program, which each year brings 25 Americans and 25 Swiss to spend a week in Switzerland. It's sort of like going to college. You accomplish everything you did in college in 4 years in a week in Switzerland. You meet everyone. It's free, and it's a great trip. It was started in 1990 by the late, great Ambassador Faith Whittlesey, who was a dear, dear friend to many of the people in this room and really basically built the American Swiss Foundation. There are now 1,400 young leaders, and it's remarkable. I mean, we've got senators, governors, leaders in Switzerland, in the Swiss parliament, CEOs, prominent members of the media, and many of you. And I'd like all of our young leaders here just to stand for a second, just so hopefully there's a lot of you here today. See, we've got a lot. It's pretty great. And folks want to nominate someone to be a young leader, just send the nomination form in. So it's my privilege today to moderate a discussion between two of my favorite people on the entire planet. And they both have done a great deal to advance the cause of Swiss and American relations, which I care about so much. The first is the current Swiss ambassador to the United States, Jacques Pitteloud, who will be coming up in a second, and then Ed McMullen, who served with great distinction as the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland and Liechtenstein from November 2017 to January 21. Now, when you get older like I am, you don't meet that many people that you think are really cool. Jacques Pitteloud is at the top of my list. And I'm not exaggerating this, but he is the Swiss James Bond. He actually knows people at MI6. Now, he may shoot me if I keep going on like this. He actually knows the M of Switzerland, and for many years he served in the Swiss Strategic Intelligence Service and was the Switzerland's first intelligence coordinator. I hear the buzz in the room. People are wondering. But he actually knows a lot more than probably anybody in this room, and he won't tell us. He was the Director of Arms Control, Disarmament, and Security Policy and Intelligence at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Bern. He was the ambassador from 2010 to 2015 to 6 countries in East Africa, based in Nairobi, Kenya. Prior to his appointment in Washington in 2019, he was the Director General of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, oversaw a $3 billion budget and 5,400 employees. He's also a retired lieutenant colonel in the Swiss Armed Forces, and he is a commander of the Mechanized Infantry Battalion. And I can tell he doesn't want me to go on any longer, so I'm going to move on. But next is Ambassador McMullen. Ed is a young leader from the class of 1995. And let me just tell just a brief story. When Faith was she was sick. And I went to see her in her apartment on Connecticut Avenue. I think Alexander Priet was with me, actually. And she didn't have a lot of energy at that point. And she said, Bob, I have really great news. President Trump is going to make Ed McMullen the ambassador to Switzerland. And it made her so incredibly happy. It just made her so happy because she had so much affection and respect for Ed. And it turned out that she was right, because he was probably our most successful ambassador since Faith. I mean, he was a fantastic ambassador for the United States. He arranged to have the president of Switzerland visit the Oval Office for talks about a potential free trade deal with the United States. He arranged a trip for the then Swiss foreign minister, now president, Ignacio Cassis, to meet folks in the United States, including Secretary of State Pompeo, and I think Nick Pompeo, the son of the former Secretary of State, is here, and also met with the then National Security Advisor. And Ed played a critical role in issues surrounding, our relationship with Iran, operating through the Swiss good offices. So he was a really fantastic, fantastic ambassador. And it's my privilege to get him up here, and let's start our discussion. Okay, well, to sort of start us off, U.S. and Swiss relations have traditionally been strong, and Switzerland is, an island in a lot of ways in Europe and perhaps the rest of the world, with free markets, low taxes, less regulation, a focus on innovation, a highly skilled workforce. You see why I like Switzerland so much. It's also an incredibly important trading partner for the United States. Some statistics that folks may not be aware of. Switzerland is literally the 7th largest direct investor in the United States. It produces the highest paid jobs, I think on average, north of $100,000. It's number 3 in direct R&D investment in the United States. Think about that, a country with 8.7 million people. The U.S. is the top export market now for Switzerland. It used to be Germany. And obviously, the Swiss have been incredibly helpful to the United States in dealing with countries like Iran, Cuba, and Venezuela. So, Jacques, first question. What is it like, to be the Swiss ambassador to the United States?
Well, it has been quite a ride. And frankly, I have the best job in the world. It's better than any
You have the coolest house.
I have a cool house with a beautiful view, but it's also about the house and the view, but it's the fact to be in a relationship that is so positive. It's the fact to be able to report to my capital only good news. I mean, I'm trying to imagine I would be the Swiss ambassador to the EU in Brussels, and I would have to report about all the difficulties and problems that we have currently with the EU. And right now, I have only good news. And that's really fun. Our trade is increasing between 15% and 20% a year. The US has turned into our main export market, which is really impressive. And the political relationship goes beyond, beyond, whoever is in the White House. We do share the same values. We do share the same strategic interests. So we are truly sister republics. So it's a great job. And on top of that, I've been here for now 3.5 years, meeting the greatest people. It's amazing. I'm being paid for meeting great people. Good fun.
What are your chief responsibilities as the ambassador?
So the chief responsibility, frankly, is to keep Switzerland on the radar. Because in Washington, D.C., there are 180 embassies vying for attention. So how do you get the attention of the White House and of the Hill? There are various ways, but of course, you have to be really present with a lot of events. My chief responsibility right now, if I look at what we've been doing the last 3 years, is increasing the economic, scientific, and academic cooperation, because that's the key. It's the economy. In the end, it's about the economy. And the more our economies are interlinked, the better it is for both countries. Just the last remark, the relationship between the United States of America and Switzerland is the demonstration that globalization works as long as it is between mature economies, comparable economies in terms of their level of sophistication and in terms of their respect for the rule of law. And we are the best demonstration because both countries are making a lot of money with the other one, and that's how it should be.
Well, Ed, same question. What was it like for you to be the U.S. ambassador to Switzerland?
Well, I had the amazing honor to follow 2 good friends that I got to know very well. Shelby Cullum Davis, who was an active trader here over on Pine Street, and I think he was actually president of this.
He was for many years. He was chairman. He was chairman.
But I got to know him when he was president and chairman of the Heritage Foundation, which was my first job out of college. And so I got to hear a lot about Switzerland from Shelby. I had spent time in Switzerland as a young man, so I knew it well. But then also Ambassador Whittlesey. She was a great friend, and many of us in this room were affected and changed by faith because she really loved Switzerland, and the U.S. relationship was critical. She served under President Reagan twice. So I had 2 great mentors as ambassadors to become ambassador to Switzerland, and a president who really gave us a clear mission and direction, and a Secretary of State and Secretary Pompeo, who's truly one of the brightest people I've ever worked with. And he also gave us great latitude and supported us when we needed the administration to be engaged with Switzerland. I think Ambassador Pitteloud we worked very closely together with, when we were in Switzerland, and Secretary Pompeo, the whole team, the National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien. It was an amazing team to work with. So getting the major objectives of the presidents accomplished successfully, and building that bilateral relationship to the point where it is today, one of the best the U.S. has ever had with Switzerland, was truly a great experience.
What were some of your big responsibilities as an ambassador for all the wannabe ambassadors in the room?
There are a lot of those, I've heard. Well, I think the most important thing is to represent our country. And I think when you have a president who has a clear delineation of what he wants to achieve in a country like Switzerland and understands the importance of that country and its economic and capital markets and the effect they have on the United States and their investment, he really did hone in very well on that. And I had experience in doing that and working in that. So it was a natural fit as ambassador to choose Switzerland and have that opportunity.
Now, Jacques, you've been serving as Swiss ambassador in Washington. You've noted for nearly 4 years. You got here 2019, just in time for the election. Then you had the pandemic. Then you had the midterms. And now you've got the run up to the 2024 presidential race. What, from your perspective, are the key opportunities and challenges in the U.S.-Swiss relationship?
Before I come to that, I just have to say something about Ed. I think that his main function was trying to steal my job, because he was the best Swiss ambassador we ever had to the U.S. Sometimes I was wondering who is advocating for the interests of Switzerland. Is it me or is it him? And frankly, he had better access than I had to the White House. So sometimes it was really him who achieved incredible.
Did you get to go to the Oval Office with Ed, or was that before?
Yes, no, I got to go to the Oval Office, but I didn't have the direct phone number. He did. So
He probably still does.
yeah. So no, but now
Not to this administration.
Yeah. Now, coming back to the to what is the challenge now? The challenge we are facing is that, in spite of what everyone was telling us, all the pundits and all the political scientists 3 years ago, that decoupling of the West from the Chinese economy was never going to happen, which reminds me of people in 1912 saying that the war in Europe was not possible because the economies were too interlinked. We heard from the pundits, the same pundits, that that there would be no war because the war was not possible anymore because it's too costly. And we heard also from the same people that the 21st century would be the century of the BRICS, meaning Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Well, 3 years later, the situation is slightly different, if you ask me. And the reality is that we are seeing a new bloc emerging, which is something that people familiar with the Cold War will know very well, which is the free world. And the free world includes, of course, countries like South Korea, like Japan, like Australia, New Zealand, and the traditional West. And the key now will be whether we remain united and whether we work together and whether we don't start stupid trade wars between ourselves, or if if each bloc decides to go it alone. And that's the strategic question of the next 10 to 15 years. And so my mission here is to try and preach a message of unity and of free trade between countries playing by the same rules, because we have to save what can be saved of the free trading world, even if blocs are emerging, and that's a key moment.
Ed, what do you see as the key issues in U.S.-Swiss relations, and what opportunities and risks do you see?
I think for many of the people in this room, you know what they are. The foreign direct investment coming from Switzerland into the U.S. is, when I got to Bern, I brought my team together in the embassy, and I basically said, look, Switzerland is the 8th largest foreign direct investor in the United States. When I leave, I want it to be the 6th largest. I didn't just come up with that figure. I delved into the details of the trading partnership. looked at how that could emerge and how we could actually achieve it. And 8 months before I left, we actually achieved that goal. So and the State Department fought us on this because you set goals, they don't like to be held to standards, right? They like to go along and get along for the most part and hope you can get there. And we'll try to do that, but I had meetings, I put together a team, and that team, many of you have worked with Sándor Galambos from the Commerce Department. Sándor is the secret weapon we had inside the embassy who knew every Swiss CEO and every chairman of every board and brought me around Switzerland for 3 years. And I met them and we convinced them with the president's policies, deregulation, better tax policy, all of those were enticing for not just Swiss, but all of Europe, all of Asia, to do more investment into the United States. That was what the key purpose of my being in Switzerland was, to improve the bilateral relationship, make sure that we brought more jobs to the United States from Switzerland, because the average job is $120,000 a year. That's how good these jobs are that are coming from Switzerland into the US. And Ambassador Pitteloud, we had a great honor to have him in Charleston at the Yacht Club for a dinner, and we helped him see the big picture. He already knew it, of what is happening in this country. The Southeast is so appealing to European investment, and many of you are seeing this yourselves. The capital markets are growing, the opportunities despite a recession are enhanced, and it really is encouraging to see this investment coming here, and Americans investing in Switzerland as well. Mm-hmm. It is, I think, unprecedented at this point how strong those relationships are, and that was the key, was making sure the relationships continue to grow, and then a free trade agreement, which is what we really worked on for the bulk of my time in Bern. We made amazing progress, and had we had a second term, I am absolutely convinced there would have been a substantive free trade agreement, because we were well on our way to getting it, and it would have been profound.
Jacques, following up on Ed's comment about the American South, I understand you're going to be accompanying Swiss President Cassis on a tour of the South, maybe in the next few months. What is drawing the Swiss to the southern part of the United States?
I will start by saying that personally, I'm convinced that the 21st century is going to be American. Because
we like that. We like
because
that.
nobody. Well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why. Because if you look at all the key technologies that are going to define the future of humankind in this century, the US is either a leader or a co-leader in these technologies. And it goes from augmented reality to artificial intelligence to quantum computing to fusion. The US is everywhere in a leading position, maybe not alone, but in a leading position. And it's also one of the economies where there still is entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is still possible. So that's the reason why the US for us remains, and it's not just ideological. We look at the numbers in terms of returns on investment over the past 40 years. Investments in the US have systematically overperformed over any other investment that the Swiss made in Europe, in China, and by the way, whilst our trade with China was growing at a healthy pace during the last 20 years, our trade with the US was growing at twice the pace of our trade with China, meaning that whilst the rest of the world was turning red, I'm not speaking American politics here, we were turning blue. So that's quite interesting. We were the only European country where the trade with the US grew much faster than with China. Now, what we are observing is a seismic shift in the American economy. We can see regions that so far were considered to be less industrialized, less advanced in terms of science and technology, taking off like rockets. And I'm speaking about the South in general, of course the Southeast. It started with your northern neighbor, with the research triangle in Raleigh, but now everyone is catching up. Very soon Texas is going to be the 8th, or maybe this year it's already the 8th biggest economy in the world, Texas alone. Arizona is taking off because and that's our observation. It's if I may say so, a neutral observation. You can see that they have understood the lessons of the clusters, and the clusters of top universities, top research institutes, top technology companies. So they are investing into the economy of the 21st century and not of the 22nd. And because there is low regulation, because the taxes are low, it's a fantastic place to invest in for Swiss companies. One caveat, of course, is the skilled workforce. We need to work on the concept of having a skilled workforce that can cope with those very high technology companies.
Ed, what do you think is drawing the Swiss companies to the American South? Same thing?
I think that first, we have no unions in the South, and that is creating huge hardship in the Northeast. And most of New York is now in South Carolina, where I live. And I think it's continuing.
A lot of Yankee fans, anyway.
Yeah, the trends
Mets
are
fans.
continuing. I think that the South has a tax policy, state to state. They vary, but overwhelmingly different than the rest of the country. That's conducive. It's safe. It's good for families. The workforce is growing and becoming more and more capable. I think, not to dismiss, when I was ambassador, I sold the whole country because there are clearly segments of California that are important to the Swiss. But I can see the trends moving, and I don't understand why, particularly in the Northeast and the Midwest and in California, they aren't getting it yet, that this could be a powerhouse if the whole country were following these guidelines, these principles, these laws, these opportunities. Think of what it could do for the United States to attract the kind of business that we do through Switzerland.
As a lawyer, let me ask a question of both of you. To what extent do you think that the rule of law and the focus on the rule of law in the United States helps or hurts us in terms of being an attractive place to invest?
It's absolutely fundamental. I mean, the fact that we are dealing with a partner here where the rule of law is being observed and respected is of the essence. We thought, operating on other markets, that with them entering the world market, they would start playing by our rules. Well, it didn't happen. And so in the end, you want the security for your investments, and much more important than just your investment, you want security for your intellectual property. And intellectual property is being respected in the US, and it can be enforced. There are quite a few other markets that would be interesting, but where intellectual property is systematically stolen, and that's not terribly helpful.
Ed?
I can tell you my most enlightening experiences were speaking with entrepreneurs in Switzerland and in Liechtenstein. I was dual-hatted. I was also ambassador to Liechtenstein. I think I'm the only ambassador that went there more than twice. But I really am amazed at the entrepreneurship and the growth of business that's there as well. But I learned a lot from those entrepreneurs in Switzerland who would look to the U.S. and what motivated them in the U.S. And rule of law, absolutely. Those who did business in China and those who did business in the U.S. understood the dichotomy of rule of law and actual property rights and how serious it was. And many of them have left China and come to the United States because they couldn't function under those onerous problems that were created and continue to get worse.
Jacques, could you tell us a little bit about the sort of bilateral agreements you're now working on with the United States for the benefit of Switzerland?
Yes, what we are working on right now are seemingly unimportant technical agreements, but they are very, very important for both economies. We just concluded an agreement on the good manufacturing practices for the pharmaceutical industry, meaning that we don't have to undergo the FDA inspections that were normally the case, and American companies in Switzerland do not have to undergo the Swiss investigations. We are speaking about potentially 100 to 120 million in economies every year that can be spared. Now we are starting one on medical instruments. Same thing. So these agreements look like very technical and very boring, and they are, because they really are. But they are very important for the industry, and they increase the level of integration between the two economies. And then we are working on the modernization of the double taxation agreement, because the double taxation agreement that we had was blocked in the Senate by one senator for 17 years, and by the time we finally ratified it, it was already outdated. So we are working on it. So these are really important agreements. They are just technical, But in the end, I mean, in this room, especially in this room, people will understand how important they are.
And tell us a little bit about how close you came to getting that free trade agreement with Switzerland and why it was so important.
Well, I think Jacques and I worked together very, very closely. Ambassador Pitteloud and I worked together very closely. The president and his USTR knew that there were countries around the world where it would be in the U.S. interest to have a trade agreement. Switzerland and the U.S. already did a great deal of trade. What would the change be? The change would basically institutionalize, for perpetuity, as long as it didn't get changed, an agreement that would enhance and grow that trade relationship. And when I was stunned because when I got to Switzerland, and everyone in Switzerland wanted a free trade agreement. Every businessman, every CEO. The farmers didn't like it because they have a lot of subsidies. They were worried about their subsidies, and I assured.
They like the cheese, though.
And they were the concerns. The cheese farmers were the most concerned.
Much better cheese in Switzerland.
But when you explain to them the markets that open up in the U.S. for these amazing cheeses, at Whole Foods and all these amazing, I mean, suddenly you have a whole new group of people willing to talk, right? And that's what I did. I went out and I talked to farmers. I educated them on the opportunities. And we were able to bring together and coalesce a team of Swiss and the U.S., which was difficult because our USTR was very adamant about balanced trade, and as we should be. But we actually agreed that we were not going to do anything that would be harmful to any Swiss market or U.S. market. And if we could get to an agreement, then, and we were there. I mean, the Swiss wanted it. The president had come to Switzerland. No president's done this in decades. 3 times. Twice for Davos, where he did bilateral meetings with the Swiss president to talk about free trade, and 25 other bilateral meetings as well. That was the benefit of being at Davos, was he could do other country bilateral meetings. But the focus was the free trade issue. And then he also, funny story, when President Maurer became president in Switzerland, very sharp economics-focused gentleman, he said to me, Ambassador, you know, we've never had a bilateral meeting. The Swiss have never been in the White House in a bilateral meeting with the President of the United States. And I said, well, we've got to change that. So I called the President and I told him the story. President Trump said, well, we've got to change that. When can they come? 2 weeks later, the Swiss and I were on planes coming back to the White House to solve that problem and put some final touches on a trade agreement that no doubt would have happened in the second term. The new administration has dissolved a lot of the things that the previous administration does. This is one of the problems with U.S. policy. It's not just Republicans, Democrats. It happens. You know, a new administration comes in, they're going to do it their way. I'm sorry that we have not seen more aggressive approach on free trade. There are other issues that the ambassador is working with the U.S. government on, but our administration and my opportunities to work with the ambassador, and you worked at the highest levels with the Secretary of State, they saw the value of Jacques Pitteloud and his representation in the United States. These were, I think, without a doubt, the great opportunities that were missed. But I do think that there is an opportunity in the future because the groundwork is laid. The Swiss are doing more and more investment here, and I think it's going to continue.
If I may just, I couldn't agree more. And there is one thing that I would like to say. It is that the world has, of course, changed, and now what we are fighting is more of a defensive battle. And the defensive battle is convince all our trading partners not to go into an isolationist mode. So one of the key questions, and again in this room I'm sure and everyone will understand, is how CFIUS is going to be interpreted. Because CFIUS can be a killer for investments, and especially for Swiss investments in the US. If we don't at some point get the normal, you know, the exception for CFIUS, our investors are systematically going to lose the battle for investment because they have to wait for the result of the CFIUS investigation and the deal is gone. So this is something that we need to work on. And right now there is all over the world, not just in the US, this kind of defensive approach to like, let's look only at our market, and this is a killer. This is something we need to work on.
And the lawyers in the room will love to hear this because in my law firm, we're bringing on CFIUS experts. It's a growing field, I'm sure in yours.
Same is true at Sullivan and Cromwell.
And I mean, it is a real issue, but it's not good or productive for the economy. Yes, we need regulation. We need to make sure that the laws are followed, but it can also squelch investment and have a serious negative effect, which we have to watch. And we need to be sure our senators and our congressmen understand this because the administration doesn't seem to.
Jacques, you mentioned before the concept of deglobalization or uncoupling. What risks or challenges do you see from deglobalization, particularly vis-a-vis the U.S., China, going forward?
So the main challenges, in a few words, will be that there will be things that we thought belonged to history, like technological export control. It's coming back. It's coming back, no question. There will be investment screening at a higher pace and with a higher intensity, and we have to be extremely careful that we don't erect new walls between our economies, and that our economies and our bilateral relationship or our multilateral relationship within the free world are not a collateral damage of measures that are actually taken against one particular bloc and not against us.
Ed, let me ask you about, Switzerland is really a leader in the world in the whole concept of apprenticeship programs. And we have a real problem in the United States, I think, with our schools, and that we're not actually training people to do things, at least in some schools. What are the opportunities that are presented for the United States by the Swiss apprenticeship model?
Well, for those who don't really know what that is, it's at a young age, I think it's in the 16 years old in Switzerland. Very different than the German model. It's a very flexible model. People in Switzerland, students, basically are able to make decisions and experience their professions as they go through school, and then they choose where they're going to work and how they work. This provides great opportunities for business and industry, not just manufacturing, but bankers even, to experience who are the best, train them, get them trained to be able to be productive later in life. It's a great model. It's something the US unfortunately doesn't have. And the reason is the teachers' unions have continued to suppress this. Teachers unions, not teachers. Teachers understand the value. Teachers unions only make money when a student is seated in a seat from grade 9 through 12. The moment they get up and leave, the money moves with the child. And it's a threat, but we have to get our country in the mindset with workforce development. We have real problems. Anyone who's coming here from Europe and looking for a workforce, they have a ready workforce in Europe. But the magnitude of opportunity in the US is great. And our kids are getting out of school with no skills, no knowledge of what they want to do. And there are some great examples where it works. But if you go out to Utah, there's a Stadler Rail, which is a great rail company. They do all the Swiss rail cars. If you've ever been on their trains, they're the best in the world. I'm a little biased, but I'm on their board. So.
But we also like those Schindler elevators.
Yes, the Schindler elevators.
I think
we love those Schindler elevators. They got us here efficiently today. I'm putting one in my house in a couple of months. But you go out to Utah, and if you go to Salt Lake, you have Boeing and you have Stadler working together through the local community college to create a Swiss-style apprenticeship. It's working. The schools actually came together. The union is not very strong out there, so they were able to get it done. And it's amazing what it does for the workforce. And then you go into Arizona, and Andre Kadelsky's doing it with his company out there, working exceedingly well. Kids getting into AI and cybersecurity in ways that most American companies can't fathom. I had a great conversation with our current ambassador to Switzerland, Scott Miller. And Scott and I had a good chat, and he said, what do you think I could do to really change things in Switzerland? And I said, you have the unique opportunity, being a Democrat, with a very good relationship Joe Biden has with the unions, to actually help them understand the value. It's not a threat. It's a huge value add to the United States. And if you do anything, that could be your greatest achievement as ambassador. And so he is trying to do that. It's a tough battle, tough issue, but I hope that he's successful, because we tried and tried to get the apprenticeships to be exported here in ways that could be valuable. And there are great pockets of success, but we have opportunities that abound if we could get through that one obstacle.
Jacques, I kind of grew up in the 80s, and probably one of the most seminal events was sort of the coming down of the Berlin Wall and the end of the Soviet Union and the opening up of Russia. As someone who's sort of, when I look back on things that have happened, say, obviously the last year, the war in Ukraine is mind-blowing to me, that we're actually having a war in Europe with tanks and howitzers, and maybe more than that soon. After World War II. As someone who's been involved in foreign affairs and intelligence matters for much of your life, what is your view as to how you think this war in Ukraine will end? And I'll ask a second question, which you never should do as a lawyer, but I'll do it anyway. And what is the current sentiment in Switzerland toward the war in Ukraine?
So maybe just starting.
Maybe flip it.
Yeah,
flip the questions.
But just starting with the intelligence bit. What we are trained to do in intelligence is to look at a certain number of factors. One is potential, the other one is intent, and the third one is timing. Now, I was watching the Russian army, the Russian armed forces, growing disproportionately for a country that has not even the GDP of Italy, and they're supposed to have the best army in the world, the best navy, the best nuclear forces, the best air force, and the best space force on top of that. So they just can't afford. So they can only afford for a certain amount of time. Then you look at intent. Vladimir Putin had said what he was going to do. He had said it in Munich in 2007. But no one wanted to listen because everyone was in denial. And then you look at the timing, and the timing of the optimal, it turns out it was not that optimal, but preparation of the Russian forces was timed for the moment when the West, especially in Europe, would be at its weakest. It was obvious that it was going to happen, but no one wanted to listen. Anyone who spoke about that was told that he was a cold warrior and you don't understand. And nowadays, in the modern times, war is not possible anymore. And okay. So well, here we are. The war happened, and it was bound to happen. So that was a very interesting situation in Switzerland. There was horror. There was dismay at the fact that a democratic, independent country could be the victim of a massive aggression by a bigger neighbor. So, for the Swiss, it kind of, it's exactly what we prepare our army for. It's like we don't want to happen.
People are smart not to mess with the Swiss.
So well, right now, we also let the guard.
The F-18s in the mountains.
Yeah, but we've let the guard down too. The last 30 years. When I was a young soldier and a young officer in the Swiss army, we had the second biggest army in Europe, 650,000, and a number of tanks and artillery that was absolutely mind-blowing. And right now we've made the same mistake as the rest. We cashed on the peace dividend, and now everyone is running back to Uncle Sam for defense because we are basically very, very weak. So in Switzerland, the discussion is still going on. Of course, we have on one hand the Talibans of neutrality, that's how I call them, who basically assume that if there would be a genocide just next door, we have to look the other way because we are neutral. That's not my vision of neutrality. And on the other hand, you have the people who are obsessed by Switzerland being the center for any mediation in the world. So our main goal should be just to be sure that if there is a peace mediation, it will be in Switzerland. And frankly, I'm being a little bit cynical here, but in that particular case, and that was the whole discussion around neutrality, and it's still raging in Switzerland. Neutrality doesn't mean neutrality of values. Neutrality means in the strict sense of the 1907 international legal definition of neutrality, we don't meddle into other people's wars. We don't meddle militarily, but it doesn't mean that we just say, because we are neutral, we are not even able to condemn a blatant aggression that, by the way, in the meantime has been declared such by the General Assembly of the United Nations and is thus binding for us.
Yeah, plus also the Swiss were very tough on sanctions on the Russians post-invasion, which was a bit of a change from what maybe would have happened 25 years ago.
It was a massive change. It was after a huge debate. It was a tough decision. It was not liked by everyone. I think it was the right thing to do because we belong to the West. We belong to the free world. We might be neutral militarily, but we belong to the side of the rule of law, of international law, of respect of national sovereignty. If not us, then who?
Ed, we also, I guess it was last week, President Biden took the train ride from Kiev, which I actually thought was a courageous thing for someone to do as the President of the United States, to go there and then actually show up in Kiev and be there with the President of the Ukraine. There's been a lot of discussion, about whether the Republicans will continue to back the Biden administration on Ukraine, and it's a complicated question. What's your view of the Biden administration's response so far, as a former diplomat, to the Soviet invasion of Ukraine?
Well, first, it's not a partisan issue, and it shouldn't be made a partisan issue.
I agree with that 100%.
And I do think, knowing what our administration, while I was ambassador, was doing in preparing to use diplomacy to deal with the problem, we made great strides using diplomacy. President Trump got criticized for talking to people like Putin, the great leader of North Korea, and others, the Taliban. But you noticed he spent 4 years as president and never started a war. Never. And he defended the country through strength, as Ronald Reagan, peace through strength. And unfortunately, I think that we are only going to see the end of this war through diplomacy. And the polling in the United States is showing it's not partisan. Overwhelmingly, more and more Americans are saying they don't want any more money being wasted on a war that no one wins. And in the end, the only way to solve it is through diplomacy and resolution. Henry Kissinger had a great idea. He advised multiple presidents on this, on how to deal with Ukraine. And he basically said Ukraine should be like Switzerland. Because like our Monroe Doctrine, we as Americans would never tolerate any incursion into Mexico or Canada by a foreign source, foreign government. And the Russians were presented with real threats, thinking that NATO was about to take Ukraine. Now, it's much more complex than this. It goes through decades of interactions and issues and history. But it is important to recognize that that there needs to be a dialogue, because the escalation of this war, if you go to Europe, you will feel the palpable fear that exists, because they are downstream from the nuclear cloud. They recognize that anything can happen. If it's not dealt with properly, Kissinger said, make Ukraine a neutral territory, negotiate over Donbass and Crimea, which, I mean, anyone who knows that history, it's very difficult to really negotiate. However, there needs to be a resolution. It needs to be quick, and it needs to end, because the escalation is a horrible thought of where it winds up.
Maybe what I thought we would do is just we would like to get everybody out of here very quickly, but I shouldn't get to ask all the questions. So any questions from the audience?
I would like to say one thing before we finish, because Switzerland has played a huge role in Ukraine, being a neutral country. They convened the Lugano conference. President Cassis, the Swiss president, now foreign minister, created this opportunity to bring the Western countries together and talk about, when the war ends, how do we rebuild Ukraine? And so there are ongoing conversations so that when it ends, and hopefully it will be soon, there will be ways to recover. And Switzerland will play a huge role in that. You already have, giving huge resources to Ukraine for rebuilding. But that's going to be the next great challenge. is how do you rebuild the country and bring it back to viability, both agriculturally, which is critical, and economically.
Okay, questions from the audience. Kimberly. Jacques?
Who am I to say what the United States should be doing? No, I wouldn't dare. But something that really worries me, and I'm coming back to my three intelligence criteria, is potential, timing, and intention. I'm very worried about what could happen in Taiwan. Because the Chinese Communist Party has been building up a military capability that is second to only one. Not tested yet, but at least on paper, extremely impressive. The intention has been stated repeatedly by the Chinese leader. And the timing is not too bad because the West is busy elsewhere. So I would be extremely worried. I would be extremely worried. What the US should do, I defer to Ed. What we should do is, and what we are trying to do is keep the dialogue with the Chinese authorities, appeal to maybe a less confrontative stance. We are trying to talk to them, but I'm not a China specialist, but I hear it's not terribly easy.
Okay, one more, right in front.
So let me respond to that, because this is, I think, Switzerland is playing a huge role, and I think the ambassador is correct. Secretary Pompeo had the right approach to China. You have conversations, you have diplomacy, you use it aggressively, because you cannot afford to have China and Russia become a triangulation against the United States. That was his policy. He worked hard to ensure that nothing happened to progress. Xi knew we were not kidding, and that this was a president who was not kidding, and a Secretary of State who conveyed that unbelievably well. And when we don't have that clarity and message, we have the problems we have today. And we have the media cyber rattling, trying to create clickbait over stories that really, we are not in the absolute crisis that the media would love us to think we are. There is ongoing dialogue between our administration and Xi, but the media hasn't helped the matter very well. But we do have a long way to go, and we must use diplomacy and be very clear where we stand.
Right in front. Yes.
Follow-up question on China. I would ask, what is the Chinese investment? Mike and I had the pleasure of working at Commerce together, and we looked at a lot of, at a tactical level, a lot of investment in things like U.S. farmland, in things like technology and semiconductor design, and things like even fertility clinics that are near our bases. I guess the question would be, isn't it incumbent on the Swiss to ensure, from an investment perspective, doing everything you can so that in the event there is some sort of seismic event with the Chinese, economies aren't too enmeshed so as to not be competition.
So the answer is, of course, it's for the Swiss to take the appropriate measures. We are a free trading country. We have 52% of our GDP is exports, so we depend on foreign trade. But the reality is that we will have to face reality. And the moment that these blocks emerge, and there will be investment screenings, we have to satisfy to the needs of whatever our main trading partners, and those are the US and the EU, will expect from us. It's in Parliament right now. It's difficult because it goes so much against our, almost primary instinct, which is to say, no, there is no reason. We buy companies abroad, others buy Swiss companies. It should be perfectly normal. But there is the perfect world, which is how the Swiss would like it to be, and then there is the real world. And the real world is that we are seeing these blocks emerging. So we will have to, and we are working on investment screening right now.
Will, I think you had a question in the front.
Yeah, I'm going to change the subject just a little bit, a little less.
Controversial.
Ambassador Pitteloud, we've talked about what a great partner Switzerland is to the United States and how much investment Switzerland provides and what a great partner you are. Could you talk a little bit about why, as Americans, we should be considering a portion of our investments in Switzerland and what a great country it is and why it's a very good idea to have eggs in more than one basket?
So I told you before, I have the best job in the world. And the part of it is that I don't even have to lie as a diplomat. So what I'm going to say, I mean it. You have every reason to come and invest in Switzerland, because I was talking about the clusters that you are creating in the US. Switzerland is a giant. It's a giant cluster. It's a giant cluster.
With really cool mountains.
Science. Cool mountains, ski slopes, skilled workforce, access to it. So if you look at monetary stability, political stability, social stability, low regulation, taxes that are still acceptable. They are not as low as they would be in the southern United States, but they are still acceptable. And the fact that you can live there and not be bothered by the paparazzi, your kids can go to school without bodyguards, and whatever. And you look at all these things together, and there is no other place. There's no better place to invest. Frankly, it is. Of course, it's expensive. Now try London. I tried. It's not the only expensive place in Europe. Why is it expensive? Precisely because it's one of the places where everyone wants to be.
Okay, one more question. Right there in the back.
To have a no.
That's a tough question.
That's a very tough question. I'm
need a lawyer to answer that
I'm
question.
trying to find the right translation for the German word vorauseilender Gehorsam. Our banks are so terrified by your authorities, by Treasury, to name them by name, that
Department of Justice.
Yeah, and by the Department of Justice.
DFS.
That let me tell you an anecdote. The moment my nomination as an ambassador to the US was public, I got this phone call from my bank, and they said, "Sir, it was nice having you as a customer for 35 years." And I said, "What do you mean having you as a customer?" And they said, "Because we're not going to keep working with you. Because you're going to the US and you're a PEP, you're a politically exposed person." And I was like, "Guys, you have had my bank account for the past 35 years. You know exactly where my money comes from. It was always my salary every month. And you know exactly what." And they said, no, it's too complicated. I had to go all the way to the CEO to be able to keep my bank account in Switzerland. And then came the question of telebanking. And they said, "Oh, you can have the bank account, but no telebanking. No transaction made from the US." Took me another round of negotiation to, in the end, to make the telebanking. So I'm doing my telebanking from a computer with an IT an identity that's located in Switzerland. That's how far we are. And can we do anything about that? No, because it's not an American problem. It's a Swiss problem. I mean, everyone is terrified, and they say,
They're terrified of the lawyers.
If you're worth under a few million, which I obviously am, we're not interested. The due diligence is such a pain in the neck. We don't want you.
We had to have bilateral negotiations to enable the embassy Americans to have bank accounts.
Yes, of course.
We literally did. We had to work with a bank. We found one bank that would actually do it. And so do you have your Swiss account? Because I was able to keep mine. The irony that I would have one and you wouldn't is too much.
I no, I still have my bank account, and I have one in the U.S. And I have one in the U.S. for current expenses. So it's possible, but only for ambassadors.
Okay, why don't we get the last word to the both of you? This has been a fabulous, fabulous discussion. So Ed, why don't you, any final words, and then Jacques, give you some final words.
Well, I'd just like to say for the American Swiss Foundation, many of you have not been involved. This is a really exciting crowd because we normally have 80% of the group is ASF related. And I know that Bob and others did a great job of Joe Semsar and Mr. Tuttle, bringing in other people. And we have 70% of the people here are not ASF related. So we hope that you found this interesting. We do these programs regularly. Bob is the chairman of the foundation. I'm vice chair. We have a fantastic team with Vanessa and her team who are leading the organization. And we hope that you'll get involved because the relationship between the United States and Switzerland, it is not a little country of chocolates and cheese. It is an amazing powerhouse with 8.5 million people who so outpunch their weight and are so critically important to the United States. So look forward to meeting more of you and seeing more of you over the years. And thank you, Bob.
Oh, Ed, and here's some Lateric chocolate.
Just what I need. Thank you.
It's one of our, maybe I think it's the official chocolate of the American Swiss
Yes.
Foundation. Jacques?
Yeah, so famous last words. What I would say is we are at a key moment in the history of democracy in the 21st century, where if we look at all the dark clouds that are piling up on the horizon, it's not necessarily going to be a funny second quarter of the 21st century, and we need to stick together. And sticking together means bundling forces to defend our vision of what society should be about. And it's freedom, of course, it's democracy, and it's also a certain vision of how the economy, science should be able to function. And which countries, but the United States and Switzerland, are better placed to do that in the 21st century. So I'm looking forward to a few very interesting months left in the US, so 1.5 years.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you very much, my friend. It was fun. Good job.